So I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar today. This is the first event in the M&M group. And I think we're very lucky today to have with us a very wonderful speaker, a brilliant speaker from the Design Studio for Social Intervention. I'd also like to thank Stephen from the EBS group, who's a reader in Culture and Organization Studies, who has helped us coordinate this seminar with the Design Studio for Social Intervention. I'd also like to thank my co-organizer, Shakib, who has assisted me with the organization of the seminar. And the first 35, 40 minutes, there would be a presentation. The topic of the talk is Ideas, Arrangement, Effects, System Design, and Social Justice. And over to you, Stephen. Maybe you'd like to introduce us to the speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just be very, very brief. I'm introducing here Kenneth Bailey and Lori Lobenstein from the Design Studio for Social Intervention. And what's interesting is that most of the time in sort of seminar, you say, here is so-and-so from this university, and they're going to present a paper that hopefully will get into a very, very good journal, and everyone will be very happy. But this is what we're doing this week. Instead, what we have is a design studio who are engaged in ongoing political practice, organizing in civil society, organizing around racial justice, around equality, who are, let's say, taking, drawing from academic theories, ideas sometimes, but as part of an ongoing organizing practice rather than an academic practice. So that's going to be quite interesting. I think the first time I met you, Kenneth, was maybe 10 years ago talking about affect theory, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So it's quite interesting to have people who are like drawing from different strains of academic work and ideas, but using them in a very practical, ongoing sense. And so that should be kind of cool to hear about. So I'll hand it over to you two to take it away.
Thank you. Laura, you want to pull up well, first, I was just going to jump in. But first, before we jump in, we also want to say thank you to Stephen, because you published us. The book exists because of your outfit, and we're so excited. We hope that you all buy one. We hope that you tell your friends to buy one. We want the book to move. Again, we're so grateful and indebted to have this book out in the world. And Lori, you want to pull up the presentation and I'll get to it.
Yeah. We're going to present for a little bit, and then we're really excited just to be in conversation with y'all after we kind of get through some of the basic content and how we use it. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll show some examples and kind of talk you through. There we go.
So welcome everyone. Lori and I are the Design Studio for Social Intervention. We run the Design Studio, it's about 15 years old, and we're about to talk about our new recent book, published on Microcompositions, Ideas, Arrangements, Effects. So the studio, as Stephen said, we're practice-based when we're really interested in applying sort of design and artistic strategies to reimagining social problems within civil society. Our work is sort of at the intersections of socially engaged art, community engaged design, a lot of civic and popular engagement, and really sort of imagining what we call social interventions, these strategies for involving communities horizontally into reconfiguring and trying on new ways to make our lives more convivial and to address problems through completely reconfiguring them. How we work. I don't know if this term is used a lot in other parts of the world, but we do what's, at least in the United States, called creative placemaking. It's sort of a mix between urbanism and civic engagement. We do lots of art residencies and fellowships. We design social interventions, and hopefully we'll be doing a lot more work explicitly around sort of design studios around social problems. We often will organize large scale workshops to bring civil society actors together to think with us and to try on our techniques for imagining new solutions to social problems. We consult and do lots of technical assistance, and we write, like the book we have out. Did you want to add anything, Lori?
Oh, that's great.
And we're about to talk about our new book, Ideas, Arrangements, Effects. We're gonna basically talk a little bit about the premise, this our organizing thesis, go through the major um, chunks, which is ideas, arrangements, and effects, and then open up for a conversation. Should I stay on this one to do the first piece around ideas are embedded within arrangements?
You want the next slide?
Yeah. Oh, no, not that one. I don't want this slide yet. No. So I do still want this slide. So so the premise of the book, Ideas, Arrangements, Effects, is that ideas are embedded within social, cultural, physical, conceptual arrangements. And we use that word on purpose to sort of invoke that things are tangible and arrangeable and movable, and we can actually engage the world by touching it. And that the ways in which we put things together through concepts and physicality and space are part of what we consider the generation or the stuff that makes social problems emerge. And so by social problems, we mean the production of effects. Not all effects are bad, but for those of us who are in the work of trying to make the world a better place and coming into that thinking through the lens of social problems, it's easy to focus on the materiality and the practicality of a social problem, like, you know, recycling plastic. We'll see the plastic, we'll see the need to recycle, but it's harder to look upstream to the series of corporations, places, stores, all of the apparatuses that are producing stuff and going upstream to actually rethink packaging, rethink all of the things that we call arrangements that actually lead to the effects of too much trash or too much plastic. And then there are ideas embedded in those arrangements having to do with convenience, how we organize time, what it means to be an individual, what it means to, want to have access to food in a grocery store. And so for us, we're really interested in saying if we want to make the world a better place, we can't just try to change these effects. We've got to go up and start to think about how social life, how our civil societies, how sociality itself is arranged, and to understand the ideas embedded within them, and to try to rethink and rearrange everything. With that, we're going to give you a very close to home example that we think everybody understands because we've all had this sort of shared experience. So we have two different setups, two different arrangements of the classroom. On the first half of this slide, for me, it's my left-hand side where this arrow is. I don't know if you can see this arrow. We have the sort of typical classroom where the teacher is up front, the students are in rows, and students' faces are facing the teacher, but not each other. And you got the first row, the second row, the third row. This situation here is an arrangement, and it's producing effects. The people in the back in this situation are like, dozing off and asking what this has to do with them. The teachers up front doing the teacher's thing. And then on the other side, we have another situation with another configuration, another arrangement that's producing another set of effects. The teachers in the circle with the students are facing each other, they're raising their hands, and they all can see each other. For us, the point here isn't that the circle is a better arrangement than the chairs in a row. For us, the point here is that there are two different set of ideas, or several more than that, instantiated within the arrangements of both of these scenarios. There are ideas embedded in both arrangements, and both arrangements are producing effects. And last, both arrangements were easily arranged and easily rearrangeable. So we felt like this is one of the easiest ways to kind of get the basic premise of what we're talking about. And for us, from here, we want to draw out from this sort of simple enclosed system of the classroom to the more complicated and overlapping systems of our civil societies, and say that even at larger scales and at more sort of complex vertical and horizontal scales, the same is true. Things and concepts and practices are overlapping, and we're embedded in them, and we have lots of capacity if we can see where and how we're being arranged to find places to either arrange them in different ways, play with configurations. And for us, we think that this coming into thinking about our civil societies, our everyday lives as arrangements that are rearrangeable makes it possible for us to start to play with imagining new worlds.
Thanks, Kenny. So we thought we'd take a minute to just kind of break down how we think about each of these components, ideas, arrangements, and effects. In the world of folks doing organizing and social justice work, we're often good at tracing negative effects back to big ideas like racism, sexism, capitalism, colonialism, homophobia. And I think within the world of academia too, right? There's a lot of really rigorous study around some of these big ideas. But one of the things that we find really important to recognize is how there's big ideas and then there's small and tricky ideas. And sometimes these are connected and sometimes these collude, sometimes these are independent. But sometimes when we talk about how they collude, we really think about how earnest people and earnest organizations, say fighting racism, can still be perpetuating it because of the ways that big ideas can kind of connect to small ideas. So in this example, when we're thinking about how racist ideas are embedded in arrangements that produce effects, we're also thinking about how white supremacist ideas and racist ideas get embedded in things that seem a little more tricky or even innocent. So ideas of who is safe or unsafe for me to be around, or who's a good coworker, who's hardworking, who I could trust or not trust, whether it's a person or an organization or a leader, who is welcoming, or what spaces feel welcoming, right? I might set out to create a welcoming space and yet create it in a way that continues to welcome folks that look like me and maybe not feel so welcoming for folks of color or folks who are not like me. I might be thinking about hiring a colleague and thinking about my ideas of what a hardworking colleague looks like, which could be, very much based on, my assumptions of elitism or white supremacy, or, what exact qualifications they might have or colleges that they might have been to. So we really want to keep an eye on how our big and sturdy ideas are embedded in arrangements, and also how our small and tricky ideas kind of keep them as big and sturdy as they do. When we talk about arrangements, and Kenny talked a little bit about why we chose that word, we're really thinking about hard and soft arrangements. So hard arrangements, like the physical arrangements of the world, our streets and bicycles and cars, our buildings, our homes, but also the soft arrangements, the social arrangements of of time or public transportation, or thinking we need 3 meals a day, or having tea or coffee, or having our food delivered. These arrangements are constantly overlapping, right? And so we've been thinking about this in the context of COVID-19 and this new sort of arrangement of essential worker. I think that is language that y'all use over there. Let us know if we're wrong. This is what we call folks on the front lines at hospitals and nursing homes, but also in grocery stores, and this food delivery person here. So we thought it might be interesting to take a moment and think together about what are these overlapping arrangements, and we can just use the chat box that are creating this new category of essential worker. If y'all want to put some of them into the chat box, Kenny can just call them out. And is this a familiar arrangement? Someone can just let us know if this language essential worker, is that something that makes sense to y'all?
The necessity of being available for work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the social arrangements of capitalism, having to pay rent or mortgage.
What I find is essential workers being used more in the UK, but often they are the least paid in society. The
Mhm.
requirements to fill one's task, even if they do not have the resources to do so. Necessity also of what is being provided.
Yeah, what we found in the States too, to echo that, right, is that really just their work is being treated as essential, whereas they are not. They're not being treated as folks who are also at risk and vulnerable for COVID-19 or being kept safe.
We have, without necessarily being guaranteed paid, 0-hour contracts are all too common. We are relying on them more than ever, but there is very little reward. We had a ridiculous clapping for care workers, but no remuneration. Essential workers so they can be replaced by machines. Whose necessity and whose convenience?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So you guys are also jumping into some of the ideas that are embedded in these arrangements, ideas about who's important or unimportant, what their work is worth monetarily, ideas about convenience. For those of us who have been working from home, even though it's got its own challenges and has its own set of arrangements, right? We're relying on folks who are going to deliver food to us. Other ideas that you want to add here?
We have another one, arrangements of government.
Thank you, thank you.
Essential because there are gaps between markets and policies.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the hard arrangements going on here? What are some of the physical, structural arrangements here?
Bodily work, supply chains,
Mm-hmm.
location of healthcare centers.
That's right, locations of stores, of healthcare centers, absolutely.
Ideas may be contextual and subject to local environments with different definitions. 100-hour weeks for health workers, post-traumatic stress.
So
and then you guys, there's also the really, really, really local arrangements of the person is on a bike with this thing on their back that's bringing food. And so we don't want you to miss the very, very close haptic sort of arrangements that surround the body as well
That's
as
right.
the sort of large arrangements that we are so excited you all are hitting. The fact that we are not allowed to move the chairs in the classroom because of COVID rules, the vagueness of the lockdown restrictions makes the lockdown essentially a choice, a luxury for some people can afford, and others become essential workers or have to just care less. Labor protection laws, logistics, transport, big and small. Logistics is all the business around arrangements.
Absolutely.
And Peter said precisely, and Chris Bell said necessity. You want to stay there, Lori, or you want to keep it moving?
Let's keep it moving. Let's go back to our classroom here. Another chance to think about hard and soft arrangements. This is an elementary school classroom, as it might look in many US schools, and you can tell us if there's some familiarity here in terms of UK schools. But same question, what are some of the hard and soft arrangements that we see here with these rows of children and our teacher in the front?
And you can also tell us if you're not in the UK, because I'm getting the sense that people are not just in the UK as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to. Social engineering, hierarchy.
So what are some of the specific arrangements that you see here that tell you hierarchy or social engineering? The clock, the schedule.
The flag.
Absolutely.
Regulation through time is a huge one. We feel like we don't investigate that and think about what that's doing enough. Rows, what are the rows doing? The flag in front, what is that flag? How is it operating? Independent work, no teamwork. And what does that say? What does it mean? What does it do? There doesn't appear to be much interaction between the teacher and the class. The positioning, i.e. standing teacher, sitting students, who sits in the back and the front. And yes,
I want to say something too about that idea of independent work, because that's a great example of this very small physical arrangement, right? We have chairs that are attached to little individual desklets, right? They're not sharing a table, they're not looking at each other, but they have their little individual notebook on their little individual desk.
And then we have Bernard said mentalization, which I'd love to hear what that means, or detention list are also on a whiteboard, public shaming of those who have been reprimanded, and indeed.
And then the notion, Nicole, of sitting versus standing, I really like that, right? The teacher gets to stand in front and the rest are sitting and looking ahead. We often question the chair as the primary tool for education.
This may be a very UK thing to say, but I do not understand the state's obsession with the flag. Apologies, I know this is possibly controversial. I live here and I don't understand the US's obsession with the flag, but I do think that it's done to participate in this idea of arrangements as holding power. It's part of producing what, how we think about atmospheres. The view of teaching as one-to-many transmission, depositing knowledge in the minds of students. Thank you, Vicentia.
Awesome.
I guess I would love to hear more about material arrangements. Rows become larger arrangements. How does A&T help us do that? A lot of our work is like, I guess we were we learned more about actor network theory as we came into our own work. But there seems to be a lot of overlap between how we think and how Bruno Latour and people who are thinking about new materialisms and actor network theory do think. The person who wrote the foreword to our book is Arturo Escobar. And one of the things he said, that's different between the way we're trying to think about this work and I guess the more sort of Latour focused A&T work is that we're actually trying to figure out how to make it more possible for us to be able to touch these arrangements and do something with them. He was saying that our approach is more direct and, for him, political. But for those of you who think about that work, you would love Arturo's forward. The class setup looks very Eastern setting, no shared desk, no shared learning. In some regions across on classroom wall function similarly to flags everywhere, power structures.
Totally, yeah.
To make it actionable, we'll have to figure out.
Thanks.
Yes, to make Ant actionable.
Cool. Well, you guys pulled out a lot of these arrangements and even some of the effects that these arrangements are producing, and definitely some of the ideas that are embedded in these arrangements.
Yes,
We
teacher
had,
practical. The teacher functions as both this kind of transmitter, but also as this managerial figure, the teacher as guard. That's a great point.
absolutely. And you all really nailed that design for control through time. The boys and girls passes, they're both physical passes, but also social control and particular social categories, right? We nailed the tension on the front and the student of the week. Someone pointed to that idea of always kind of competing to be the best.
And somebody also pointed to the perspective of us looking at the classes, we're looking at it from above.
Yeah.
What is interesting as well is to explore the enhanced agency and therefore the affordances of smart technology, ones which are designed for control and capabilities. Yes, Peter, that's what we're trying to get to. Is like we created this to give us all an easy way, not easy, but a kind of user-friendly way into these larger conversations around affordances and smart technology and what is agency and where is agency. You all are totally, that's where this work is going. Do you think the flag obsession perhaps comes from a lack of history? The flag as a symbol seems to be the figurehead of the US. Yes, I mean, this is what we're trying to get at. And I think the real point here is that the flag instantiated in space is playing a role, it's operating, it's doing something. And it's part of the production of effects. You want to take it back, Lori?
Yeah, let's keep going. Thanks, y'all.
And again, we typically think about effects as the things that make us pay attention to social problems. They're the phenomena that we typically sort of encapsulate as a social problem, like in the United States with schools, sticking with that example, it's not uncommon for a lot of public school systems to have as much as half of their population drop out by the time they're 15 or 16. And so that body of phenomena, that body of data, we would call an effect. We would draw a circle around it and problematize it and then say we need to do something about it. So effects are the kinds of phenomena that we tend to organize around and fight against. And that might be climate change, or that might be school dropout rates, or that might be, economic indicators. And we also want to say that sort of going, Stephen was saying, when we first met, we were talking about affect theory. We also want to say that effects are also the accumulation of everyday affect. So the kinds of the ways in which hard and soft arrangements produce intensities of feeling and produce situations that then come to be known as emotions are also part of the larger container that we think about as effects. Did you want to say anything about that, Lori? Or you want to keep going?
I think the only thing I'd say is that for folks doing social justice work, sometimes the effects just come at us so fast. We're constantly feeling like we're fighting negative effects and on the defense versus being able to really not just think about arrangements, but imagine the arrangements that we want and really be able to step into proposing and fighting for the arrangements we want rather than continuing to have to fight against things.
Oh, and another thing too is here that because effects are so dramatic and they tend to pull our attention, they pull our attention away from what we would say the arrangements out of which those effects are emerging. So if we go back to the classroom and we think about school dropout rates, that same example would say we would then attend to the mental or behavioral or cultural problems of the people who have dropped out versus going back up to the arrangements and saying, is there something about these chairs, these desks, this teacher up front, that flag, that schedule, the hard and soft arrangements and the ideas embedded in them that are leading to the dropout rates versus in circulating and problematizing the people out of who are, for us, evidencing the problem or expressing the phenomena that then gets called a problem. Uh, um, what about what isn't seen but acted on? Reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't know, do people still recite the Pledge of Allegiance in the United States? I would imagine in some places. And and we would say all of those kinds of quotidian sort of inactions produce the atmosphere of the place. They participate in the production of arrangements. They're part of, in a way, this idea of temporal choreographies. It's another thing we're also interested in sort of paying attention to in terms of the way we get arranged to move through and in that space and time. And we think all of this, we have to, for us, we say as people who care about social life and care about design, we have to figure out ways to bring our attention to all of these different bodies of phenomenon to ask, what are they doing, and how are they implicated in the production of social problems? And so you probably all can understand where we were trying to go. For us, paying attention to the way ideas are embedded in social arrangements and the effects they produce makes it possible for us to understand and actually start to do the work of changing arrangements for which for us is a way of moving into making the world a better place. You want to read this quote by Arundhati Roy, Laura, because you read better than I do?
Yeah, totally. Beautiful piece called "The Pandemic is a Portal" that was in the Financial Times in April. And Arundhati Roy said, "We can choose to walk through the portal, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it."
And so for us, this lever of arrangements is a concrete place to actually start to make new worlds or make other worlds or make what, our friend and mentor and sort of theoretical ally Arturo Escobar would call making the pluriversal, making the pluriverse, making multiple worlds that can be that can share space and time. And so we think that this is what we have with COVID and what we have with sort of a breakdown of all of these arrangements are a real opportunity to step into imagining new ones, to step into starting to question, really problematize the current arrangements of our everyday lives, of civil society, of political economies, of cities, of all of these things that we take for granted. And that we can start to imagine new arrangements that are more convivial, more interesting, and find problems that aren't as old and dull as the ones we already have. Let's go towards some new, more interesting problems.
So we think a lot about how to intervene in existing arrangements, and we thought we would share a couple examples from our work. These are a few pictures from a multi-day in public festival. We were thinking about the hard and soft arrangements of spatial injustice. And
Can I just say one thing there, Lori?
Yeah, totally.
Because a lot of places don't have the same kind of public problems that we do in the US, particularly in the city we were intervening in Boston. Most of public life is commercial life, and there isn't really a festival culture. There really isn't a sort of ethos of creating opportunities for everyone to move about in space and time. Most public events are market-based. So I just wanted to say that because that's not true everywhere.
Yeah, thank you. This another thing that might be particular to Boston is it's what's called it's really neighborhood focused, and so there's a lot of ways that by talking about its neighborhoods, it avoids talking about the fact that it is becoming a city with more and more folks of color that still imagines itself a very white historic city. So in our downtown spaces, we have this picture on the left where they're dancing. We have this kind of set of stadium seating that's created in the middle of a commercial district to provide some music and some entertainment, and yet it's programmed as if the entire city is very white. And so we thought, not only do we want to do events in communities, but also to actively invite folks from all different cultures to be at the heart of the city and to activate the heart of the city in a way that's more about cultural enjoyment than just commercial shopping. So we did the In Public Festival, both in the heart of the city and in one of the neighborhoods where our design studio is. That picture on the lower right was the festival coming together in the Upham's Corner neighborhood. So that was one example of intervening in some arrangements that were producing spatial injustice, that were producing and reproducing these spaces where white folks like myself could walk and shop and do our thing and even listen to music, whereas folks of color were not expected to be actually in public or feel safe. They were hyper policed. And so there's ways that we wanted to actually role model people and community members doing things in public together.
Can I just add one more thing there too?
Oh, please.
The other really interesting thing we did here is we created opportunities at night for people from indigenous communities and sort of Black and Caribbean communities to sort of overlap. And that kind of production of experience was fairly novel. Like there aren't that many opportunities where First Nations people would come to the heart of the city for a good time and happen to bump into Black people who were also there for a good time with other people who were there for in public. And so there was this sort of moment where people were looking at each other like, where the hell are we? And and for us, we think that creating those experiences and having those sort of point towards the possibility of new tomorrows is really what the game is about.
Nicole asked the question, what's a community in this context? Great question. I think when I was talking about the communities in the city or community-based city, we were thinking about neighborhoods, right? They're neighborhoods with different populations. And then there was also different communities, as Kenny was talking about, in terms of different folks from different cultural backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. And yeah, the organization of the event would have brought multiple actors together. Absolutely. A lot of artists and healers and activists came together, as well as just, you know, like the fun of having people just pass by, not intending to come to the event and seeing something strange.
And Mega, right now, that's been a real struggle. Most of our events have been these Zoom events. We have not done any of our more spatially haptic focused, embodied practices. Because
well, I would say one thing, Kenny, is the projection event.
Oh, right. That's so a good point.
We, you know, being faced with not being able to do something like in public, we actually partnered with a number of both local artists and other artists that we know from around the country and around the world to do some large scale projections onto the Strand Theater, which is a large city-owned theater right there in Upham's Corner. So we were actually asking folks to share drawings, photos, videos of performances, things that embody the stories of their lives during COVID and before COVID. And also we challenged artists, we did an art commission to think about what would be the arrangements of the future. So we were projecting in such a way that passersby could see it, drivers by could see it, thinking about rearranging our lives in the future.
And Peter asked, were we able to co-design with communities? That's really our practice. Our practice is sort of developing design methodologies to co-design with both the overlap of civil society communities, residents, resident people who live in a particular place together, um, and um, and to sort of co-imagine. So yes, so much of our work is literally about are both you speakers on Twitter to tag you? Yes. If you go to at DS4SI, I'll put the Twitter handle in right now. At
I got it.
DS4SI.
I got it.
Oh, thank you, Lori. But yes, back to Peter, that's really our whole practice is developing these methodologies, but then developing the opportunities to co-design both with the civil society actors, so people who are trying to actively change social problems, and people who live in a place who just want to imagine new ways to live together. So those are really the constituencies we typically design with. And one of the ways we try to triangulate those designs are to bring people like yourselves who think in large systems and are well-read and know what actor network theory is and affect theory. We try to bring people like you together with people who live in places and communities and understand power and context and their lives, together with artists who understand form and aesthetics and relationality, and how to produce experience. And we say, if we bring these ways of understanding worlds together and create containers for us to share what we know, might those opportunities lead us into imagining new ways to live together? And does the organization of the event also create hierarchies and power structures? I think often what happens is that the construction of these events creates what we refer to as new ways of experiencing social room. So what typically happens when we get it right is that people are just really surprised. Um, uh, so like to go back to this in public event, we closed out with this First Nations Indigenous comedy troupe called the 1491s. And they were the last act to go on right before a Black trans queer art collective had did this performance on the steps. And so this sort of brushing up against these two worlds, and then all of a sudden you have all of these people sort of participating in this comedy event with First Nations people for whom a lot of people had never even come into contact with. So what typically happens is people are just like, where are we? What's going on? And they just met with lots of surprise, more so than sort of the reproducing of hierarchies or power structures. And we tend to, it's almost like when we get it right, and we don't always get it right, when we get it right, these little glimpses into new futurities actually invert power relationships.
Can I
So
add, Kenny? I was going to say too, when we do get it right, and oftentimes this is when we do an event like Public Kitchen, and we'll jump to that next, when it's more than one day, or our social emergency response centers, there's also a lot of room, because you make a good question there about like who's selecting what happens. And so when we have time, when we have events that stretch over time, we actually get to see people step in and say, oh, you should have done this, or what about that? And then we can be like, that'd be awesome. You know,
and that's
like
really a lot of the co-design process is like
yeah.
we create a scaffolding that actually other people color into.
And I think if we jump to the ways that we think about imagining new arrangements with folks, it really kind of gets to that more, because there's this intentionality of creating a container that folks can imagine with us. Kenny, you want to do this one, or you want me to?
Oh, I don't remember. Is it me?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, you take it.
Okay.
I'll add in if you want me to.
Yeah. So we were thinking about this propensity. This was about 2011, I think, or 2012. Thinking about this propensity to think that privatization was solving everything. And we wanted to counterpropose that the public was still a work in progress and that we could imagine more vibrant public infrastructures
And
that
that's,
might make,
can I add
go
one
ahead.
thing there? Just for another context thing. I don't know if that's true in the UK, but in the United States or in other parts of the world, we sort of fetishize the privatization of everything. And so, yeah, I'll just stop there. I just wanted to, I don't know if people understand that, if that's obvious.
Right. So we were, busy privatizing public schools and public water and, all sorts of things. Our responsibilities of policing and whatnot. So we thought about making a gesture in the opposite direction. Like we thought about the kitchen, which is such a private family space. And we said, what if kitchens were public, like libraries? How could that change public social life? Like, what if we had these spaces where people could actually come together? What would they do, sharing food or equipment or recipes or stories? And so we created this temporary space. We call it a productive fiction, right? A temporary space that holds something that we might want for the future, and invited people to co-imagine it with us. And we've actually done it a number of times in a number of different places around the country and around the world. So really saying, if we are going to imagine new arrangements, and this is really a moment to do that, right? We see so many arrangements collapsing around us. How would we imagine new arrangements of public safety or new arrangements of public health? And it really takes sometimes not just asking the question, but finding ways that people can experience something and then add to it. Here's some other views from our public kitchen here locally in Boston.
The other thing we have to say too is we are always collaborating with artists that care about art and society, designers, and often are thinking with academics as we're producing all of these opportunities to co-design or co-imagine or co-create.
Yeah, I'd say let's stop sharing and start some conversation. Thanks, y'all. Feel free to unmute yourselves or add a question to the chat.
Peter has his hand up. Go for it, Peter. We want to hear what you got to say.
Hi. Yeah, no, I thought this was an incredible presentation, and I'm probably biased because this is precisely the types of things that I do. So,
Cool.
But one of the things I was going to ask is that I've created a kind of toolkit for commons-based design that uses augmented reality, and we work with conflict communities using it. And it's a mobile app. But one of the things that we found as we're going into different contexts like Belfast is that we have to really think about how we integrate co-design and praxis-based learning, which this is, with understanding that a lot of communities, there's a huge inequality in their understanding of future-based and innovative ideas, and also the ability to do skills design. So, I mean, I think what we've experienced empirically is that there's oftentimes a huge class divide between the ability of, I would say, middle and upper class communities to have basic design and planning skills, and then communities that have been historically disenfranchised from doing that. And also more futuristic things like a community kitchen, but also things like cooperative ownership or maker spaces, these types of things that would actually bring in a kind of more post-capitalist society. They're oftentimes, I mean, just, they're not taught in general. So I was wondering what your experience is in terms of balancing having a very participative community design aspect with also being able to introduce to people really strong skills building, and also kind of basic information about innovative solutions that they might not have known about or be so far from their radar. Because that's something we've experienced in our practices about trying to get that balance right.
Do you have an answer for that?
No, I don't. I mean, I have some ideas, but I'd be really, because I mean, I think you guys are doing incredible work. So I would love to hear your views on it because, I know coming from a social justice background myself and then becoming an academic, there's a lot of different expertise and skills and ways in community engagement and things that, so any advice or views that you have on it, I would find very insightful, because I don't think there's easy answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Vid, you put your hand up. Were you thinking
Yes.
about the same problem?
I am dealing with skills problems. I work with craftspersons working in specifically with block printing, working with natural dyes, natural indigo. Now, these are not techniques that are taught in universities. These are techniques and traditions that have been passed on from generation to generation. So they have actually been isolated, put into pockets, and the existing supply chains of large retail is just preying on that knowledge. So they don't have access directly to the markets, and they don't speak English. So, but the language of business and the internet is mostly English. I think a lot more needs to be done in terms of education and skills building, but in the vernacular, not just in English. Perhaps your book also should be translated into other languages.
Totally.
That's what Arturo said. He wants it translated in every language possible. It was very nice of him.
But I have encountered a slightly different problem. In my work with craftspersons and working with social projects that are bringing the community together, it's actually enabling government and private sector to prey on the community rather than the other way around. So the assumption is society will take care of itself by coming together, so we don't have to change at all. So what can be done to actually shape policy and shape corporate policy?
For us, we think of this work as really scaling out towards we're starting with small arrangements towards rearranging vertically and horizontally until we are rearranging the apparatuses out of which policy emerges. So part of what we might be doing, I don't know how governance is arranged in the context that you're talking about, but what would it look like if potentially if communities in your care could evaluate the arrangements of governance and say, we don't know if these arrangements are working, and start to propose new ones and start to fight for those new ones. We really see this way of moving into ideas, arrangements, effects as being a kind of in between what is typically referred to as prefigurative politics, and that's sort of going off and making your own worlds, and then protest, which is fighting against this world. We sort of see this work we're trying to do is sort of in this sweet spot of what we're thinking about as propositional politics, where we're engaging power by saying this is the world we want. And so we're not sort of avoiding the power fight by trying to go off and just create alternative utopias. But we do know that if we want to keep people in the game, protest isn't enough. We can't just have people fighting against what they don't want. We have to start to have people experience concretely the worlds they want and to start fighting for those worlds. And so we really see this offering that we made as a way of giving people access into that kind of praxis.
One of the challenges that I think comes up both in your question, Peter, and yours, Vidyut, is the ways that problem solving has been placed on the NGO community as well. So sometimes when we create something like the temporary public kitchen, where people were really excited and starting to imagine what a public kitchen would bring to their lives, you should have a garden, or, you should hire my uncle, he's an amazing chef, or, sharing food, sharing recipes. Then they come back to us and say, well, when are you starting the public kitchen? Or when are you an NGO supporting these merchants? Or when are you a design studio creating this design, right? So I think in multiple ways, we're trying to question and challenge those arrangements, right? So first of all, you know, in one direction, trying to engage the sort of in public style, empowering folks to have more of a sense of their civic authority, right? Their sense that they could create change in their communities, or they could create a larger change with other community members. And then also questioning, you know, this idea that, oh, well, if you can do, you know, person to person sort of horizontal mutual aid, then the government's doing fine, you know, and so both trying to challenge in both of those directions.
And I think, you know, that's one of our next sort of real learning stretches for us too, is how to continue to invite and in a way sort of build civic capacity to recognize that this way of engaging in power that's more propositional is a thing that we can all do, and to recognize that if they want that to happen, that they have to take those steps and not just have that kind of civic authority fall to the owning class that's already used to having that kind of civic authority, because they typically, you know, went to undergrad with the people who are the bureaucrats, and so it feels like just like a conversation. But the question I wanted to ask you all is that true in your context? Is there like NGO sector that sort of functions as this kind of intermediary in ways that sort of siphon off civic authority or civic desires or civic agency the way it happens in the United States? Because, you know, I know a lot of that has to do with the US philanthropic industrial complex, and I don't know if that's true everywhere else. NGOs are set up to help get tax benefits in your context,
Yes.
and how does it impact people's agency on the ground?
So the people who set up the NGOs, they get a lot of the donations, and the people working for the NGOs get paid pittance, because the argument is always, oh, you're working for a social cause. It's an NGO. We don't have money, but the people at the top of the NGO get, you know, have lifestyles similar to that of CEOs. It just seems a little absurd.
I would kind of like to maybe agree with what was being said regarding NGOs, because in developing country contexts, I think NGOs are really very powerful to represent the voices of the marginalized segments of the population. However, I think the authority is a bit, sometimes they tend to abuse their authority as well at certain times. And so I think that needs to be, so I think NGO regulation is an important aspect where you know, they're very empowered by representing the voices of the marginalized segments, but on the other hand, they can also be abusing their powers and authority, and the trickle down effect to the actual communities, the benefits which actually reaches the communities, I think is very little. So I think a lot of it is linked with finance and power, and, you know, just to get the money from big you know, donators, or you know, from big organizations, you know, like foreign NGOs.
Yeah, I was just hearing a piece, Atika, that really was looking at that in sort of an ideas embedded in arrangements, the ways that we will donate money, we being folks in the States certainly, and perhaps other places too, will donate money to NGOs that then give out food donations. And we have a lot of skepticism about poor people's ability to make wise choices about money, right? So we want to donate money to an NGO versus to real people, or we want to donate money to a US-based NGO rather than a local NGO, right? There's a lot of ways that our ideas about poor people and about people of color or people in other countries shape these arrangements and what we're willing to donate to.
Also, the agenda, the donors donate money with an agenda. So the setup of the NGO has to be aligned to the agenda of the donor, not necessarily what is required in that community.
That's right.
I think that's a really important point. Like, so some of the things from an economic perspective that I think is increasingly global, and ironically, I think it really really was facilitated by the Clinton Foundation, because they were very key on this and had access to change a lot of the things. Is that when you do your impact evaluations, they have to be aligned to financial sustainability, and that becomes a really interesting delimitation of what
It's an
becomes lawful,
arrangement. That's a
right?
total arrangement. And that
Yeah,
idea is embedded in an arrangement, and I'm sure it's producing effects.
absolutely. So essentially, right, the ways it was very interesting, without being too boring, in the 90s, there was a huge point about exactly what you're saying about capabilities, local capabilities, and ways in which this can lead to local results, right? And what became then very worrying was that pretty much within 10 years that became hijacked, and that's, I think, the only word you can use, where local capabilities meant financial capabilities. And that's where you got the microcredit discourses, but that's also where NGOs, even ones that weren't quote unquote market oriented, had to at least formally have tick boxes as part of their pathway to impacts and evaluation criteria. How much are you increasing the marketability and profitability of a community? So now you
And
have
how did that
things
what effects did that produce inside of inside of the sector that had to make those shifts?
Well, I think personally, from my experience, I think you've seen two big effects. One, it's allowed for a discursive colonization of their practices, right? So now
Wow.
everything's about, as was brought up, bringing in big donors, but also about particular types of entrepreneurial skills, which in reality we've has been very clear are like at the bottom of the things that these communities need. But in order to get funding, that becomes, but even if it's done originally cynically, there's an effect where it becomes reproducible. And after a while, if you keep doing entrepreneurial skills training, even if it's at first done for a cynical reason of just, I have to do this tick box, it becomes embedded as something hegemonic and something that therefore comes to dominate what is expected. I think the other thing is that it creates all sorts of work for people on the ground, because, a lot of people actually delivering this, they have to find ways to essentially, like, for instance, they give a huge amount of, talking about arrangements, money for technologies that aren't needed, right? And instead of just saying, no, we don't want those, we'd rather have like £1 million to actually, build basic water infrastructures in these communities. They have to say, yes, yes, please give us the smart technology, right? So then they have to find ways to fill out paperwork and to engage things like tablets where they don't need it in order just to get that money. And
It
it
sounds
creates
like we
all
need
sorts
to
of
do an
really dangerous
IE.
accountability things.
It sounds like
So
we need to figure out some kind of way to collaboratively, all of us, with Vidyut and yourself, do a specific whole IE sort of thing specifically around aid and sort
No,
of
but
international
there is
NGO.
there is a change now, though. Most NGOs and development practices are being aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And I think Harvard is introducing a course on impact evaluation and measurement as well. Uh, the metrics one has to look out for in creating social impact. I mean, that is a step forward, but I don't think it's still the answer.
I thought one of the things that was interesting from the talk too, was the ways in which these types of things are organically happening. I mean, I thought what was interesting in the US was, that movement from resistance and protest to world building was there. I mean, what you saw in Seattle might have been just a initial spark, but I think, it was an indication that these aren't utopian. I mean, I think people really do want these. They want to have spaces that go beyond. And I think that it's interesting to see going forward how we balance these kind of very positive design things with, the recognition that we also have to have them protected. Because I mean, you look at these spaces and they were very quickly, once they were saw to be too much of a threat to the Seattle power structure, um, you know, in a kind of like Paris Commune type of way, overtaken. So I think it's really interesting how, as I mean, because I think what you're doing is probably the most important things we can do right now in many ways on so many levels, and it is a balance of exciting experimentation and co-design with recognition that when they threaten power too much, how do we protect these spaces? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't think it's an easy answer. But I think it is something we've seen over the last year.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's something we've seen over many years. So, and I agree, we don't have an answer for that, but I think the more we're engaging folks and folks are engaging each other in imagining solutions, and we have seen some exciting solutions or some exciting new arrangements around public safety, around reimagining the abolition of police in ways that communities keep each other safe, or ways that communities support each other. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that Kenny said already is like, we know that these things do challenge power, right? So I think you're right. There's ways that we have to continue to build the imaginative chops and the language and the ways that we celebrate when folks are trying new things, and the ways that we help them see, because we don't always see. We saw a glimpse in Seattle, but what else is going on that we're not hearing in the media, that we're not seeing? How do we learn from each other? It's definitely one of the things that we try to look around whenever we're creating a container for imagination. What's happening around the world? I mean, Americans, I think, are the worst in looking around the world, right? So how do we bring in examples? Folks are trying amazing things, whether it's in Uganda or Sri Lanka or other places that we haven't heard about. And how do we learn from those things, as well as learning from some tools of design or thinking about new arrangements together?
How are we doing on time, Stephen?
I think that we should probably be moving towards concluding at some point, but I was feeling really guilty about having to say that because it was a really cool discussion.
I'm sorry, I have to leave. I have another meeting, but do continue with your discussion. The only issue is that I just hope that if I leave, I hope the recording doesn't stop. But in any case, I'll share the recording with everyone, and even with Stephen. And I'd like to, in the end, maybe Shakib, who's my co-organizer, can probably conclude the discussion. But thank you. I've got to go. I'm sorry about this, but it was a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it. And thank you, everyone who attended.
We can
Thank
wrap up
you.
as well. Maybe it's just a nice time to end. And if everyone is interested in continuing the conversation with